Welcome to Money Talk Viewpoint. I'm Chantel Leeson. Successful businesses have one thing in common, is that they know how to market to the right people with the right message at the right time. Our guest speaker is Elaine Petrucci, and Jonathan and Katie Pfisterer will be a part of our audience co-hosting, and my co-host is Dennis Williams. Mary, how are you?
I'm great, Chantel. How are you today?
Very well. I'm thanking you for joining us today to talk about your subject matter, which is very, very critical to all of us. If we live long enough, we'll all get there.
Yes, they will. My topic that the three of us will be talking about is communication. And what I do is help busy, frazzled executives who are juggling family, work, and caring for a loved one to achieve a better balance and achieve the success that they desire.
Dennis, share the audience a little bit about your background. Would you mind?
Sure, it's rather eclectic. I currently am founder and creator of both software application as well as educational programs that focus around communication, actually, in which enabling people to have additional clarity of just how they manage their cash and the impact it can have in boosting their credit score, as well as accelerating getting rid of debt and paying significantly less interest rate that enables them to be able to achieve what's most important to them. I come from a background of primarily in healthcare, in which be it a CFO, as well as in HR, as well as a clinic administrator, and actually started a long-term care company for Blue Cross Blue Shield of Hawaii years ago. So, and personal experience taking care of my parents as well as my mother-in-law. So communication is just absolutely key in every aspect of it. And so it's been a delight working with Mary as far as assisting her in getting her message out.
This is impromptu at this point. We weren't expecting this, but I'm going to introduce Jonathan and Katie Pfisterer, because they are working in the long-term care. Well, they're working in the insurance business. I'll let them explain it to you, but they have to be comfortable communicating with people. Jonathan and Katie, can you share with a little bit about yourself and what you do?
So yes, we do health and life insurance. And so we will help people enroll into health plans. One of our primary focuses is on Medicare. And a lot of the time that we do actually find clients sometimes that are not prepared for long-term care. And then we do have some that do have long-term care plans. So that's part of our relationship in this, is that we do offer long-term care and we help people figure out what those needs might be.
Jonathan, don't hide back.
I mean, yes, all of that. And really, it's really important in how to communicate and who are we talking to, the kids, the spouse, the brother, the sister, and trying to navigate through that minefield, not to not say the right thing or say the wrong thing, and to be well versed within the different scopes of long-term, short-term, home health, all that different variables within that space. So we help, and we sit down at kitchen tables primarily and walk people through that.
We have been talking over the past week or so about the impact people have when someone gets to that phase of life where they need to have caregiving, and whether it's an executive having to stay home with a family member or hiring outside the house. Mary, I'll let you pick it up from here and share with us what you and I talked about last week.
Definitely. Our focus is on communication, and what I help clients do is help them really focus in on a person's communication so that they can fill in the gaps, so to speak, whether or not the person that you're talking to is distorting, generalizing, or deleting information. So let me back up a minute. We receive about 12,000 bits of information per second, and that is way too much for us to take in to comprehend. So our unconscious mind starts putting all the information through filters, which we call distortions, deletions, or generalizations. And it helps us sort out that information that really best serves our values and our beliefs. And by the end of the day, we're getting down to about 7 plus or minus 2 bits of information that we can really actually comprehend and spend time digesting. So by going through these 3 different filters of generalization, distortion, and deletion, a person may say something and their intention may not be understood by the person that they're talking to. So let me give you an example. So deep structure, our unconscious mind supports a specific thought that we have, and then that gets generalized to a thought. And then that thought is distorted, which comes out as August. And then that gets deleted and becomes the ugh is what we actually say. So we're trying, what I do and what I'm suggesting to our audience is to really help the person that they're talking to fill in the information that they've either generalized, distorted, or deleted. So to begin with, we want to start with distortions because they have the greater leverage to uncover the problem that the person is having in terms of communicating what they want and need and making that problem disappear. So let me give you 2 examples of each of the deletions, distortions, and generalizations. So one of the first distortions is mind reading, where the person claims to know somebody's internal state without really giving the information by which they came about that information. So somebody may say to you, "You don't like me," and your response could be, "How do you know I don't like you?" And that's helping the person that you're talking to recover the source of the information about their statement. "You don't like me because you make me feel a certain way," or "I heard someone state that you had said this about me in a different situation." Another,
Mary,
yes?
I have one question that might be really important to fill in a gap, and that is when you talk about a gap in communication, what exactly does that mean?
A gap in information means that the person that is communicating a thought to another person doesn't really give the person that they're talking to all the information that the other person needs to understand clearly what the person who is talking intends to say. So there's a gap because all that information that a person receives has gone through those 3 filters: distortion, generalization, or deletion. And because of that, the person that is talking is giving the person that they're talking to information that has gone through those filters is not complete. So the person that is listening to the speaker needs to help the speaker fill in the information that they lost somewhere when the information went through those 3 filters.
I want to interject a thought here for those
Sure.
who are listening. What we're addressing here, not only our everyday issues, but where this is important, critically important, is when you are dealing with someone in a caregiving situation,
Mhm.
particularly those that are going through various phases of dementia or Alzheimer's, or anything where there's a cognitive issue. And what
Mhm.
Mary is addressing is the gaps, because in everyday life, we plenty of gaps go on in communicating with people. But where this is critical is when someone is going through that phase of loss of cognitive skills. Dennis, you want to add a little bit to that?
Yes, I mean, I would add just a couple of things is one, one of the gaps that of course frequently occurs is there's already pre-selected beliefs of what you think someone should be doing for
Right.
you. Right.
Right.
And
Mhm.
of course, this happens in all fairness in the workplace as well,
Mhm.
in which you think someone understands what's expected, but in fact, what they think is expected versus what, let's just say, a supervisor is expecting, they don't match. But it
Now
just
that's
becomes more critical in healthcare when literally it has an impact on mental health, as relates to just depression, loss of socialization, increases in dependency, and so having that clarity of knowing what's going on is what you're addressing right now, right, Mary? Where it's that gap of recognizing when a gap happens so you can fill it, so you can meet somebody's needs, so that you're on the same page. Am I listening to you correctly?
Yes, thank you for putting it more succinctly. Yes, you're helping fill in the information that the person that you're caring for is attempting to communicate to their caregiver. So the caregiver has a better clarity of what the person that they're caring for wants or needs.
It's like a translator, if you think about
Yeah,
it.
that's a good point. Thank you.
And he's right on target with that on both, and I want to go back and address something that Dennis said, because in the workplace, this is where it's critical in the workplace. The people that are listening to this program, some are going to be people in the workplace and some are going to be people who are home in a caregiving position. In the workplace, oftentimes it happens is that you're working for someone and they're communicating something to you or vice versa. And that gap affects how information is transmitted and how work is completed. And oftentimes that can lead to even a career derailment. Dennis,
Yeah, I almost boil it down to just to one word, and I would call that word clarity. So in the HR setting, when I used to coach executives or my own staff, and they come in and complain about an employee, my first question is, if I have this employee come and talk to me and ask them what they believe is expected of them for satisfactory performance, will it be the same thing that you tell me? 95% of the time when I frame it in that manner, the person will say, either I'm not sure or I don't think so. I said, well, then the problem's not the employee, the problem is you. You need to go and close the gap and bring clarity, so then you can move forward. And it's just more critical in healthcare.
Right.
Right? Especially if you're dealing with cognitive issues or cultural issues of expectation.
Mhm.
You have to close those gaps so that, and of course, if it's family, that's what makes it more complicated, right?
yes.
It's
Mhm.
one thing. It's one thing to work with people that work, and then you get to leave them at the end of the day. But if there's family, we're all kind of coming out of the same cultural context, which can cause this makes the process more complex. So, Mary, your comments about these problems are good to bring to our attention, so that we become aware of the holes that that we'll drop into, right? That can make communicating and bringing clarity that much more difficult.
Definitely. So if there is a caregiver who, I'll just speak from my experience with my parents' caregivers, some of them were not initially English speaking caregivers. Not to say that they weren't proficient in what they did, but like you said, the cultural backgrounds were different than ours. So that makes the communication, like you said, more complex, because now two people are navigating two different cultures at the same time, in addition to communicating with one another and getting clarity that they need.
Let me turn this over to Katie and Dennis Katie and Jonathan for a second, because they deal in the long-term care. You know, the Medicare long-term care insurance. When people are coming in, whether it's at the initial phase when they are applying for insurance, or where they're coming in the implementation phase, where someone's going through a need to make use of as a beneficiary of that policy, give me some feedback on what your experiences have been.
So usually the experience is whatever it is that they have, they either don't have it or it's never enough. Because with long-term care today, going into facilities, it is bankrupting the amount of money and dollars that it costs for. So most times than not, the average plan for everybody is to, I have kids, they're gonna take care of me when I'm older, and they're the ones that are going to do it, and they're going to have to stop doing what they're doing, or we're helping them navigate to get home health care through a facility with a caregiver, or maybe that individual's, spouse or somebody is now going to get hired to be a home health care person for that person, and that's a whole nother process in itself. So there's so many different companies out there and so many different things, and there's so many companies no longer offering long-term care. So it's something that when we talk about it, it's, well, did you get it when you're in your 40s or 50s like you were supposed to? Usually everyone says no. And now that we're in our mid 60s or late 60s, can we still get it? Maybe, probably not, because it's all underwritten and things of that sort. So there's traditionally other options and venues that we have to go down, whether that's self-insuring or getting some additional policies. Yeah, by all means.
So some of the experiences that we've had goes back to that communication too, and it kind of makes it for an awkward situation, because we'll find that some of the parents are in need of care, and their children, they haven't addressed it with their children, and vice versa. And so it makes it hard, because now there's a lot of pressure on the children, and they feel like they need to do something, but mom or dad, they're no longer in the mental state to be able to always make those decisions well. And it makes it very tense between them. So like one of our clients, her mom is supposed to, and she qualifies to get home health care, to have someone come in and take care of her, but she doesn't want the help. And there's that idea of like, they're afraid of losing independence. So having those conversations early is like huge. We try to stress that a lot with our clients, because as I went to a seminar, as one of the guest speakers had mentioned, if you're waiting until they already are, like, say with Alzheimer's or dementia, if they're already at that point, it's too late, because you're beyond the point of being able to communicate well.
Well, also issue of insurability also has been
Right.
eliminated.
And that's why I really want to advocate, like you and all of us have been saying, they need to get all the medical insurance and legal information done before there is a healthcare emergency. And then, like Katie said, then it's too late to do anything at that point, because you have very limited options.
Mary, you have you have a coaching program or a caregiver academy.
Yes.
Share with us what that does and how that helps people, at what phase, and when is the best time for them to come for that kind of training?
Thank you for asking about that. I suggest that caregivers, busy executives, come to me early, or when they're in the process of caring for a loved one, so that we can work together in terms of looking at any of their limiting beliefs, strategies that no longer serve them, and their values or other concerns that they may have to address early so that they can take better self-care of themselves and then better be able to help the person that they're caring for. So it's really a comprehensive program where we look at mind-body techniques and some hypnosis training that can best help the person doing the care so that they can have a better quality of relationship with the person that they're caring for and themselves as well, and then other people around them.
Now, Mary, do you align yourself with employers, or how do you get into are you able to get into small businesses to discuss the kind of programs that you have available? And I'll tell you the reason for asking that.
Mhm.
By the time they need it, it's probably way too far. I think that a lot of times, if we implement programs in the workplace that employees can take advantage of, an employee who's in their late 40s or early 50s probably have parents who are reaching that phase of life. And rather than wait till their parents are past that and already into the long-term care need or caregiving need, train people ahead of time so they can understand what would be some triggering factors they can acknowledge that can let them know maybe we need to get some kind of training. Dennis, I see you scratching your head. I know you have something to say.
Well, this time I just had an itch. Although I
Come on,
can't,
Dennis.
I mean, there is one item that Jonathan actually touched on that that most people do not think about. And that is there's a higher probability of disability than there is of death. And in that context, everyone thinks in terms of the replacement of income, but they forget, depending upon what the injury is, it may have a direct impact on the individual's ability to continue activities of daily living, especially if you're dealing with issues of head trauma. So people tend to only think about long-term care and communication in the context of somebody who is aging. But these issues also occur considerably younger. And again, there's a higher probability of these incidents, more so than dying, which of course demands, as it should, life insurance coverage. And so to Jonathan's point, beginning to look at long-term care in your 40s and 50s for yourself is extremely important, because the cost is dramatically less, for one thing. And so I think that's something that people do need to kind of consciously think about. The other thing I was going to also add, again, when it comes back to communication, is one of the biggest challenges is getting the person who has lost control the willingness to let go of that control, so that there's not a crisis. And unfortunately, usually what happens is things happen in crisis. So you're having to scurry around dealing with something. And again, coming back to communication, you got all kinds of gaps that are happening because the family member is trying to live life. And all of a sudden, this crisis is tossed on them that disrupts life. And when you're dealing with disruption, you don't usually do well with your communication in that environment. And so, I think from that perspective, I think that's the other dimension that I think Jonathan and Katie were touching on just briefly when they're sitting down at dining room tables and dealing with issues, and how you integrate the communication with a viable solution that you can actually act on.
There's a factor.
Could I jump in real quick?
I'm going to say one statement about this, and that is having trust with family members, because you can have family members, but there's no trust. If there's no trust, there's not much you can do. Just having a trusted conversation. I think that's what you mean by sitting at the dinner table. Let me turn to Katie, because I'm going to let her talk about. Go ahead, Katie.
So this is also from my personal experience, and I love what Dennis said, how this all ties together. So my stepdad had an incident with work, and they didn't know at the time that he did have a disease, an underlying disease that was rearing its ugly head at that time. But what it caused was he was a truck driver delivering food to restaurants. And so it actually caused him to become disabled, and things that my mom hadn't even thought about. She's real good about the insurance. So he had life insurance. But disability, usually through your work, only covers you, and it's not for much. It's not going to replace your paycheck completely for a short period of time. So now not only did they have those financial stresses because he needed help with his disease, but wasn't bringing in as much money, and they still had the regular bills to pay. And that caused so many communication issues for the government. It took them 2 years to go through the whole disability process. So there's still that gap between losing that disability from his workplace and the government actually finally qualifying him as disabled. So, you know, that was minimally just a 2-year process there before he had to go through additional treatment. So there's so many things that we don't think about, and that hit him in his 40s. So it can happen at any age. It's not necessarily as you're getting older.
Wow.
Well, and that's true. I have worked with clients who may have fallen like down the stairs at work in the stairwell, and they're not able to work anymore because of just the head trauma, the light sensitivities, the sound sensitivities, and everything else that you have to deal with when you have a head injury. So I agree with everyone. I think those family conversations need to start early. And I know it's hard with people in the baby boomer generation because they really want to feel independent and want to hold onto their independence for as long as possible. I know for a fact my parents really wanted to be at home, and that was great. It did entail a lot of, 24/7 care that they had to pay out of pocket because they didn't, they had like all the medical insurance and legal documentation. They just didn't have like a long-term care policy or any other insurance product that could have helped them at that point.
Americans are living longer now, longer than ever, right? And one of the things I talked about earlier was these, I don't know what the time frame specifically, but let's say early 2000s, there was over 100 long-term care companies out there doing policies. And then in the teens, at some point, we're down to 15 or 10. And that's because they were building this off of life insurance. It wasn't built for long-term care or use, continual use of not just 2, 3, 4 years, but 5, 6, 7, 8 years, right? People are lingering on. So it's something to continuously think about. Just want to touch on. And then the other thing you said, a fall. I don't know how many times I said it to our clients, but a fall will change your life, man. Well, it doesn't matter how old you are, whether you can't walk as well, you need a new hip, then that's the whole thing, and then that can get infected. It's a terrible rabbit hole that we're not going to go down. But yeah, fall is just detrimental.
It all goes back to that communication thing, doesn't it?
Right, it does. I think communication with family members is really critical, and finding ways to bring up sensitive topics like insurance and legal and medical insurance needs to be discussed. I think that every family is different, so you have to take into account everybody's personality and how the way that they perceive things. And I think conversations need to start early so that before there's a crisis that occurs, because it usually does happen when somebody has a life-changing event, whether it's a fall or some progressive disease like dementia. So it's so important to have like all those pieces in place as early as possible.
We've got about 10 minutes left. I want to cover something on the other end. We've talked about proactive thinking. Let's talk about some reactive things, because not everything is positive. and Dan, Dennis, Katie and Jonathan, you and I talked about this in the previous meeting. What happens? Let's talk about what happens when it's not a positive family relationship, or when the kids are trying to go after the parents' money, or when they're trying to access things from an account or an insurance policy. Give me some feedback, your experiences with that.
Talk about.
I've had multiple experiences, both in the Medicare business and working in an accounting office. A lot of it comes down to legal. And so people didn't prepare with the power of attorney, or they didn't write stuff a certain way in a will or trust. So you have to be really wise with who you're making your power of attorney, because we have seen people who did actually have a power of attorney. But unfortunately, the person they chose, like, they may have been great at the time, but those dollar signs are flashing in front of them, and they start thinking about how they can preserve their own wealth, looking at it from their perspective of like, well, this is my money, so I want to make it last for me. And I have seen where sometimes it neglects the elderly. And there is, just like we've heard of DCFS, oftentimes people think of younger children, but there is elderly abuse as well. So people can report that, but it gets really ugly when things come down to what's legal. And we've seen it where the power of attorney was legally able to do things because they had that, right? And it made it really difficult because we knew that the client wasn't in the best situation.
You hit a real raw nerve for me, Katie, when you bring this up, because I've seen it happen repeatedly. And there are two types of long-term care policies. Well, actually, let's go backwards. The issue of a power of attorney. I was fortunate. I was the power of attorney for my parents. But one of the things that happened when it triggered was, now the question becomes, what happens if something happens to me? I had a mother with Alzheimer's. And so, of course, people tell me I should never say this, but I do it anyway. I say, if I get hit by a truck tomorrow, who's taking care of mom? Mm-hmm. And there is no clear-cut answer, especially if there are other members in the family who are not the best at caregiving. So that's where a trust comes into place in order to potentially provide that protection. But the other issue that you pointed up is that, everybody loves the idea of what's called an indemnity policy, in which you get the money if it triggers. But people don't think about the current prevalence of Alzheimer's and dementia, that you may not be of sound mind to be able to make sure that the dollars are being spent appropriately. And you may not have a relative who is acting with integrity as relates to what they're going to charge to take those dollars. So I'm sure two of you have seen that before. And nobody ever thinks of these things that'll ever happen to them, versus if you have a reimbursement policy, you've got somebody to kind of put up some barriers to make sure that those protections are in place, so that the beneficiary the insured is not being taken advantage of. But beauty of an indemnity policy, of course, is it sold on having the freedom to do what you want. But it's frequently not pointed out that if you're going down that road, then you really need to have some backstops to make sure that the person who has access to the dollars is going to spend them accordingly. And I've seen that just too many times, of family members taking advantage.
That thing you said earlier about crisis mode because something happened, and what Chantel's talking about is so what's the experience? What something happens once, there's no plan in place, and this is happening. What do you do? And who's there to help you, right? And those are, I feel that we see that a heck of a lot more than we see it here. I'm well prepared. Here's a binder of everything, and here's all my accounts and my passwords, and here's everybody that's on that. That's great. That's 1 out of 10 of every client we see, if we're lucky. Less. It's really about, what do we do when we come up across somebody who we're finding that maybe they're not being abused, maybe they don't know, and things of that sort. So we hope, trust. We talked about that earlier, finding somebody you trust, and as fiduciaries, and what we do to try to help everybody in the best interest. you know, we hope and we wish there were more people out there like us doing what we're doing. And we see it from time to time, but, you know, just like any other family member, they see those dollar signs flashing, people change. And, you know, and the other thing, updating the trusts, update your trusts from 20 years ago, 30 years ago. There might be new grandkids in the picture. You know, someone might not be around anymore. Free planning the best is the best. But so what do we do when that's not the case anymore? You know, there's always something to do if we discover, whether that's state help, policy help, guaranteed issue things. Maybe there's a pool of money here that, you know, needs to be utilized. And then what's that look back look like, and how much of that could go before you go in the state? And so, you know, hopefully my advice would be find Katie or John or someone like us so we can help navigate that with you, become your partners in that, and putting that good out there in that world.
I know it's
Not someone like us.
The financial advisor, I did a written document, a written deliverable. And part of my process was that every single year, every single client who had a plan had to meet with me. But I didn't just meet with them. My practice at the time was comparable to what I do now, which is family office. As family office is a consortium of people that work together. I met with their attorney, their accountant, whoever was the person in their family they trusted. And we would go through all the people that were involved, and we did it on an annual basis. It was required for all of my clients, but I charged a retainer fee for that service. And now that I'm in the family office segment, that's just what the family office segment does. I want to cover one other thing too, and that is that I've watched this when the client wasn't my client. I watched where they had a power of attorney. The client had gotten ill. The daughter had the power of attorney, and the daughter, when the father was in the hospital, they thought it was worse than what they thought. But what happened was he recovered. But in the meantime, the daughter had unraveled a lot of material, financial instruments of the father. So that does happen. I think we're trying to address in this segment is that, and we're going to have another segment next week. So this is a little ongoing series here. Talk about the critical issues people face and thinking through the process of what you would want to have in place for yourself and for family members. If that, it doesn't happen it's not a guarantee, but if it should happen, who's going to take care of what? Dennis, looks like you're about to say something.
Well, I just want to bring it back to Mary and communication again. And I was going to ask her one other question and that is, if you think about these communication gaps, which are the ones that are the most, what's the word I want, destructive in getting through to solutions? How would you prioritize them? Which of the gaps do you find to be the absolutely most destructive in getting through to moving a family in the right direction when we're dealing with healthcare issues?
That's a great question. I think just going in with your own preconceived notion of what you think the person needs and or wants without, if possible, taking into account what the other person's needs and wants really are. So it's really getting back to really communicating really specifically with the person who is providing the care and the person receiving the care, just making sure that everyone understands the person who needs care's wants and needs are specifically, and not trying to interject the person who is potentially providing the care, putting their own perceptions on what the person wants or needs. It's just being more open, I guess, to understanding the person that needs the care wants, and given like their life experiences. So really being very clear, like you were saying, Dennis, about knowing the person who is receiving the care well enough. So if there is an unexpected emergency, the person stepping in is really taking into account that person's wants or needs in a specific situation. So for example, if for some reason somebody doesn't want to, the person that would be receiving care doesn't really want any advanced directive, doesn't have any direct advanced directives, and they personally would not like CPR or being on a vent, anything to prolong life. But if the person stepping in does that unwittingly, or just because they have nefarious thoughts about how to keep the person alive so that they can declare somebody incompetent so that they can take over the financial needs of the person. It really, I can see both sides. So it really, to answer your question, it really comes down to respecting the other person and knowing what they would want in any specific situation, because you know them well enough to really, I guess, appreciate the experiences that they had and what their wishes would be.
We're going to wrap up at this point, but I want to let the audience know this is going to be on YouTube, but we're going to be doing this live stream for as long as you guys would like. I think we should cover this for several weeks, because this is not the sexy phase of life. This is the most difficult phase for most people to even address. Yet it is part of life, because if you're going to go down that path of living longer, we have to prepare for that phase of our lives. So if I can get you guys to agree, we'll put together a calendar and invite our audience. But we're going to be doing this live on YouTube, LinkedIn, and Facebook. Anything to say before we wrap up, folks? Introduce yourselves or wrap up here.
Well,
Anybody?
Thanks for the opportunity to have this conversation.
Pardon me?
Thanks for the opportunity to have this conversation. It's important.
Oh, you're very well. Listen, you're very welcome. And I think it's so important because it is very difficult to talk about. And it's the reality of many people's lives. We're going to go on the ugly face on our next conversation about the negative aspects that happen in most families. Anything else, anybody, before I wrap up?
Just knowing that if anyone, I've heard that, other people have had less than desirable experiences with the person that they may be required to help in some way. I mean, they're welcome to work with me to help them overcome any trauma that they may have had that may interfere with their ability to care for someone